Welcome back to another edition of Quarantine History. In this video, we will be talking about Chapter 16.3, which deals with basically 1965 to 1968 with regards to the Vietnam War. The first part is going to deal with the growing unrest with regards to the Vietnam War. People are going to start to turn on the involvement of the United States in Vietnam. One of the main reasons Americans started to turn against the war was that it now became a war fought by non-volunteers. Up to this point, American soldiers in Vietnam were volunteers. They were in the military, and they said, I want to go over to Vietnam. Now, the government and the military said, we need many more soldiers there. We're going to have to institute the draft. The draft, had been instituted in the Civil War, World War I, and World War II. So this wasn't something new in the country. However, this was a war that was not popular. Obviously, the Civil War was, I don't know if popular is the right word, but people were willing to fight. In that war, they were willing to fight in World War I, and they were willing to fight in World War II. Here, most Americans did not want to go over. One reason was that the draft system was flawed. It was very easy to get out of being drafted. If you were in college, if you had a certain type of job, if you had money, you could find ways around of getting drafted. Another aspect of the draft was that a large portion of the draftees were African Americans. And civil rights leaders like Dr. King said that wasn't right. How can you send a large portion of African American soldiers to Vietnam when you won't even give them civil rights back home? And so as a result, the draft system changed. It went to a lottery. And basically what they did is they went by birthdays. Each day of the year was put into an order, and once they called, if April 1st was the first pick, anyone born on April 1st would have to report to training, and that's how the draft system changed. Still, Americans were not happy with it because a lot of people were against this war. They didn't think it was a important piece of the domino theory. They didn't see how South Vietnam becoming communist would affect America, so forth and so on. Another area in American life to see a rise in anti-war movement was colleges. Colleges become sort of the epicenter of these movements because these were the kids that were getting drafted. They were the ones who were in college, getting a degree, and then all of a sudden, one day they get a note saying, "Hey, you've been drafted. You're going to Vietnam." And it could be someone who had no intentions of going into the military, some average kid. I'm just thinking of myself, what if that happened to me? I had obviously no intentions of going to the military, and then bam, you get a letter that says, "Hey, report, and you're going to be going over to war." That's got to be a shock to the system. Another reason Americans turned on the war was that Vietnam became what is known as the first living room war. Vietnam was the first war with TV. I guess Korea, you could argue TV was around. But here in Vietnam, the three major networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, they were embedded with the troops. So they would get reports from the front line. It wasn't a radio report like in World War II or in Korea. It wasn't something that the government put out. Here was something that was being shown on TV. And Americans would see this, and they would hear the government say the exact opposite of what they were seeing, and they didn't know who to believe. Who was lying? Is it the media, or was it the government? And a lot of people sided with, the media, that the government was lying. And so it became known as the living room war because people could literally watch the war unfold from their living rooms. Now, the turning point of the Vietnam War is this. It's called the Tet Offensive. Now, in late 1967, General William Westmoreland, the leader of American troops in Vietnam, comes home and tells Congress the war is coming to an end. America is winning. The Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, are, months away from asking for peace. Well, in January of 1968, the North and the Viet Cong launched their biggest attack of the war. Up to this point, their battles have been, small scale, hit and run, nothing, to a World War II or Korea size. Well, that changed with the Tet Offensive. It happened around a holiday. It's called Tet. It has to do with the Lunar New Year, and it's a major holiday in Vietnam. It was supposed to be, a couple days of no fighting. Well, they launched their biggest attack. And during the Tet Offensive, 36 capital cities in South Vietnam are hit. 5 major cities and the United States Embassy in Saigon were all hit simultaneously. So, on one hand, you have the American military and the government saying, no, this war is coming to an end, we're winning, and then the enemy launches their biggest attack. So the American people obviously are getting 2 different messages. With that being said, Tet will end after about a month or 2 of fighting. And Tet, you can argue, has 2 outcomes. You could argue Tet was a victory for the United States because militarily the United States and its ally South Vietnam stopped the North and the Viet Cong from taking anything. They did not take anything they attacked. However, you could argue that Tet was a defeat because most Americans after Tet said, we can't win. This is a war the United States cannot win. We're not going to win. We need to get out. And as a result, the American government will change their strategy after Tet to one of victory, to one of peace. They're going to try and get out. Tet also had another outcome. Because of Tet, in the early 1968 primaries for president, Lyndon Johnson, who was up for re-election, doesn't do well. And there is some concern that not only will he might lose the election, he may even lose the nomination. He may not be picked by his party to be president or to be the nominee. And as a result, in the end of March 1968, Lyndon Johnson, from this picture, Lyndon Johnson tells the American people he will not run for re-election. So the 1968 election now is open to both parties. A week after Johnson tells the country he is not running for re-election, Dr. King is assassinated. We talked about this in chapter 14. 2 months later, another assassination. This one is Robert Kennedy, brother of John Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was probably going to win the Democratic nomination for president, but he is murdered June 5th, 1968, moments after winning the California primary. 1968 continues with its violence, this time at the Democratic National Convention. Here, anti-war protesters and police get into an altercation, and it is shown all over the country and the world, American citizens and police basically attacking each other. The Democrats are able to get through their convention. They pick the current vice president. His name was Hubert Humphrey. So basically they're on their third string candidate, sort of like, football. They're on their third string quarterback. Johnson was first choice, then Robert Kennedy. Now, they sort of settled on Hubert Humphrey. The Republicans have nominated Richard Nixon, the former vice president under Dwight Eisenhower. He has come out of sort of political purgatory. He loses the 1960 election to John Kennedy. He loses the 1962 California governor election, and he was sort of gone. He makes a comeback here, though, and obviously wins the election of 1968. Nixon's strategy was to go after the people he dubbed the silent majority. He believed there were more people that were in favor of the war than there were demonstrators. And that strategy led him to victory. As you can see, he won by about 1%, 43.6 to 42.5. And so Richard Nixon will win the 1968 election. He will take over in early 1969, and his biggest issue will be the Vietnam War. So that is it for this video. Next video, we will deal with the end of the Vietnam War. Until then, be good.